Contrast is one of my favorite elements in an anime, and it's often used to create some expert levels of comedic contradiction along the lines of Detroit Metal City or Nichijou, furthering laughs through a sheer disconnect. However, it's also a prevalent factor in the impression that a serious anime can make. One of the first things I think of when I look back to the original Hellsing is the stark and just ever-present contrast of the visuals throughout that whole first episode. The pure forms of black and red, setting the scene for something big, an uneasy feeling to follow our main man of Alucard throughout this series. Devil's Line is a vampire and romance anime that had the same idea of contrast, but in a different way, kind of taking it in a different direction. Now, in the Devil's Line world, vampires are driven to blood not for power or life, but through addiction. Once they taste the blood of a human, they can never go back and live their lives in a constant battle to hide what they are. The soul, mind, and body of a human trapped under the weight of an unshakable need. Although reinforced by the crescendo of this episode, the premise is set immediately through our very first look at the show. Our first look at one of these vampires is not the suave and confident likes of Alucard from Hellsing or Vamp from Metal Gear Solid, because I had to fit Metal Gear Solid in here somewhere because I fucking love it, but instead the face of duress and pain. Camera pan up to the first vampire we see as his victims flee before him reveals a face that is crying and screaming. As his murders continue, we also see the first glimpse of a vampire's transformation, a shift of the hands from human tools of creation to demon's claws meant to destroy. Their eyes turn sharp and piercing, and he lets out a cry, visceral and demented in a sense, yet lacking and feeling kind of fake and forced in another sense. As an intro, it's average. It sets off a basis of action and violence while laying the premise of vampires being more troubled and pained in comparison to some other series. However, the weird cries don't fill enough time and sound more fitting for some monster out of a cheap horror game than in a higher standard anime. The sky and moon also are a bit red-shifted, not to the level of Hellsing by any means, but with the presence of the, obviously, color of blood there, but it's not deep and full, but shallow. It's a tint of red that also ripples along the edges of the screen like a siren. It adds to the feeling of confusion, but just comes off as tacky and cheap. However, speaking of confusion, the show does a decent job of setting up that a little bit in the act of dropping us immediately into the action right away, kind of drawing a parallel to what a scattered and crazed mind of a vampire might feel like there, obviously leaving us a little bit confused, but again, nothing super strong there. I mentioned contrast, and getting back to that, we cut to something very different, and this is obviously where the show's contrast comes in mostly. Now, the first episode transitions from these hectic, fast-paced scenes of vampires to the everyday life of one of our main characters, Tsukasa. She's exactly what you'd expect. Smart, well-mannered, and helpful, and most of all, bland. One of the biggest downfalls of the show so far is the characterization of Tsukasa. She serves as a blank canvas for a viewer to apply herself on to experience the romance aspect, but just falls short in everything else. All of her traits are told to us by lines from her friends, and her only point, from what I've seen, is to further the plot. Whenever she's kind of there in a scene, she's just there, not really advancing the plot. She doesn't really start many conversations, but simply answers what she's led into or what she's questioned with. Now, the first episode resolves more around two male characters than her. First off, we have Akimura, who is her friend who just recently admitted to falling for her, but was denied. A happy-eyed man with a more soft smile, and also a mysterious man as the other kind of main character of this episode, watching from the shadows. We see a few shots of this man with dark hair and eyes, a jacket covering his mouth, a quite suspicious look when you contrast it with Tsukasa's longtime friend of Akimura. As the aforementioned longtime friend of our main character is walking her home, he makes mention of her recent denial of him. So it's not something we actually see on screen, but is implied off of screen. Now, he insists that she doesn't need to worry about it, and even cracks a joke about it. However, we see the first shift in his personality here, as he admits that he couldn't handle it if she had a boyfriend. His eyes open wide to reveal a serious stare, and his voice grows dull before returning to its more natural-seeming state. Akimura is introduced almost as soon as Tsukasa and is almost somewhat more developed than her as well. From what we see, he seems gentle and kind, with this sudden change creating an unsettling feeling under the surface. He's typically more of your kind of more typical nice guy character. In anime, the very closed eyes, more of just lines, that kind of soft look to him. He just seems like that kind of man, and this sudden jump is something that it does well in creating a little bit of a feeling of tension there, kind of wondering where this is going and what his next change might actually lead to. Now, for a moment, I'm going to backtrack and talk about some misdirection that the show does fairly well as well. In one of the scenes away from Tsukasa, we see some pretty standard setup. A man with one human eye and one vampire is shown watching from afar for just a moment as a few side characters are introduced lightly in the act of actually apprehending another vampire. As they capture him, we overhear a police radio exchange, asking if it's the culprit of a recent series of killings dubbed the Vampire Murders. The question is met with a swift no, and just as they're about to say who the killer is, a cut to Tsukasa's stalker is made, an evidenceless accusation, but one still nonetheless, and the only solid info the watcher has to go on. Every time we see this man, more ominous music plays in the background, in addition to the main character constantly being disturbed by his presence. The clear setup is obviously for your average everyday girl to get involved with a more dark and mysterious vampire, with their relationship obviously growing from a cold beginning to something more over time, and that will happen. Now, while crossing the street, our pair sees her stalker and runs in a new direction, and as they stop, we see a shaken and nervous Tsukasa, eyes trembling with the unknown. Akimura moves to comfort her, pulling her in close. His eyes begin to open and his breath deepens. The shots cut back and forth between the two. His lips part as if ready to kiss her, and she pushes him away just as it looks like he's about to. The two exchange some awkward glances before a quick apology, another jump back to his usual demeanor there. Now, this is another moment the show does well. A display of tension and an unsettling feeling from a character set up to be the opposite of such. Again, he's set up as more of the nice guy character, but we keep getting these more and more unsettling moments from him, where at first we just see him as more of a character maybe still upset about the recent denial, turning into more of a creepy almost character, with just the way his demeanor is in the entire scene. Now, as they move to leave and continue walking, they're met by the stalker with a few words, those being, "Hey there, vampire." Now, at this point, the role shift is complete, and the accused with no case against him confronts the formerly innocent. Our mystery man, later revealed to be named Anzai, reveals a bleeding thumb to Akimura, and we see him shift from his usual self once more, but to a new and different form, that of a vampire. His eyes now in complete contrast to what they once were, and what follows is one of the strongest moments of the show. We learn that he is the true culprit of the vampire murders, which was the murder and rape of 3 women, which he committed driven to keep his bloodlust away from the object of his love and onto others whose lives meant less to him. His accuser is still unknown to us, calling him trash and claiming that he could never protect Tsukasa, which is met with a change from his calm demeanor once more to of anger and panic. He starts to claim what he's done to protect her, ask if he should have killed her instead to save the other women, or just take his own life and end it all. It brings up some deeper points about the subjective worth of human lives from the mouth of someone who's taking them, and shows the means a monster in human skin went to for an unrequited love. Despite one shove, though, the show is quite weak on him for what he has done. He isn't killed, but tranquilized, and aside from a short glimpse, we never see him indulging into his urges. It humanizes him in a weird way, as one final series of shots shows him reaching for Tsukasa, crying, and finally passing out while still thinking her name. She cries but makes no comment, and even later feels bad for him. Whereas the likes of Death Note humanized a murderer through a will for a better world and made him hate us as well through a god complex, Devil's Line has a woman shrug off some very awkward advances and cry for a rapist. Her friend, but terrible nonetheless. I'm all for starting on a strong note, but if they had tackled a less intense subject, had Akimura be more mild in his crimes, maybe even taking a light approach and killing criminals, they could have done a better job of making a case for us to feel for vampires. There's also some parallels to some real-world problems as well, most notably that being drug addiction, whereas these people aren't even introduced to it by anything, aren't peer pressured into it, but it's just a natural urge always living inside of them until one day it's awakened. And it does have some parallels to the real world, which does make a stronger case for the show as well, but it also compares it to something so bad right away that it blows it out of proportion a little bit, or just kind of blows the case out of the water, because again, had they started on something more subtle, and again, had the real world parallels be more realistic, whereas, in real life, obviously acts of murder and theft and things have been committed for things like drug addiction, they jump immediately to one of the worst possible things right away, and the parallel kind of falls apart there, where it jumps from the real realm into something obviously still realistic, but just less realistic and very sudden. After the altercation where Tsukasa is actually pushed down once and somehow suffers a leg injury with a very plot-convenient point there, Anzai carries her home, and the final twist is revealed after she expresses feeling like a bad friend for not knowing about Akimara, a section that felt unnecessary and was another moment of telling and not showing. After a speech about what vampires are, the struggle they face every day, and the statement that devils and humans are never meant to be together, Anzai notices a cut on her lip, something else sustained from her magical fall of injuries. He seems taken aback, almost shooken by something so small. Next thing we know, we see her on the ground, pinned down by her former savior, as he licks her blood and forces an exchange of kisses onto her. His eyes turn to that of a vampire. This leaves a very unsavory feel, especially as a softer song starts to play into the outro as he forces upon her. Had they stopped at him being a vampire, given us a hint of his eyes as he flees from his temptations, it would have been a decent enough ending while still leaving questions unanswered, but it jumps to the romance aspects too quick and quite unromantically. So overall, the show is below average. Half the premise is good, but a dive into the world of vampires and the interesting questions and kind of moral and ethical theories and ideas it could explain feels like it's only going to be held back by a more forced romance. A feeling of it's going to be exactly what you expect comes to mind. The characters feel a little more bland and just headed in that direction where you could pretty much guess what's going to happen before it even does, which feels pretty subpar after a decent twist, one that they obviously led on quite heavily through the shifts in Akimura's personality and the obvious hints of someone being the killer with no evidence. But talking about the characters being more standard and bland, with how bland our main character of Tsukasa comes across as, I find myself not caring about this setup love story, but more about the deep areas that could be explored through characters with a natural-born and incurable addiction. The animation also feels just kind of more cheap, with the action being extremely quick, some more fast, jarring movements, and those fast movements, like running, appearing very awkward. The art style also leaves a little something to be desired as well. The music is done quite well in comparison, despite a few missteps with the music matching the visuals, obviously, especially at the end there. It builds tension well enough. The voice acting is, once again, just kind of right on the line or a little bit below the line of average, and the quality actually has a pretty noticeable drop when the characters are yelling. The action is gory, and I've seen people saying that it's a little bit over the top, but I actually like that as a contrast to the inevitable love plot. If they develop the main character more and use that contrast to their advantage, it could be good, especially if they explore into more deep ideas. I would say it's hard to make a good setup in one episode, but plenty of shows have done it. And I want to like it for the little bit of promise that it shows, but overall, I don't see Devil's Line being worth the time much, and that's the Devil's bottom line.